Hey guys, welcome back to the Paladins Alliance. I'm doing a different video style today with the America's RMR preview. I've done a couple with Neo on his channel, and I mean he's done one on his own with the Europe side of things. And I know a lot of people have talked about the Asian RMR, but I think we as North American commentators would like to still preview this because I honestly think it's a pretty competitive set of teams here, and I'm not alone in this situation. I've got myself Cole with me, who's obviously been around the North American commentating space and was at ESL Challenger Atlanta with me not too long ago. So, Cole, how you doing? How do you feel about these American teams?
You know what? I guess I can give you my general vibe here, and
Hmm.
it's definitely competitive, right? I like
Yeah.
that word here. Is it in like the most like internationally competitive state?
No.
That's where the big concern is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like unfortunately for these America's RMRs, we are looking at a bit of a scene that's we're coming into it with so many uncertainties here. No guarantees for any of these rosters. We don't have like one team that's looking to shine above the rest. And so, yeah, I mean, competitive is the right word, but only for our region, and that's still exciting. It'll make for a really good RMR. It just depends on how well these teams are going to do outside of that.
Right, and you have to consider the format that we're going to be playing under. You can only have two losses and then you go home pretty much. So that those first rounds are actually going to be pretty important, all things said. And I mean, we have five spots up for grabs and one legend spot, I believe, four contender spots now that Liquid is back in the conversation. And I think it's pretty safe to assume who we think should be making it through in terms of like maybe three of these teams, but I think there's like two spots that I feel are pretty susceptible to kind of any team in this RMR, and we'll see what actually happens after these first rounds. But I'd like to at least try to get the kind of vibe of what you're thinking and look at kind of what team you would potentially give the legend spot to, the qualification teams, and then kind of your outside rosters with the upset possible, and then the bomb out. And I'll just say right away, I'm gonna put Rocket in the NA because I don't think we'll be seeing them. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it does kind of beg the question of if we're going to see a different roster come through, if they just or if it's already too late for that. Very well could be the case. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a good one to just start out. I like the NA because you're just not going to be seeing them. Below bomb
No.
out is actually crazy, but yeah,
Yeah.
obviously the cheat bans they take a toll on on your ability to play the game.
Well, we'll go from Rocket and we'll go to Elevate, which is still a team that is honestly pretty hard to pin down, and I think that a lot of people don't necessarily like this roster, but they're getting results, and honestly, I think they've really improved over the last few months. And now that they have an org under their banner, like where do you really pin this Elevate roster?
Yeah, I mean, I again, like you said, they might not be the most loved in the like NA scene right now, but what they've built here, obviously, you've got uh like an incredibly exciting core when you talk about like history. Snav, Dare, and Shane have been playing together for so incredibly long. Shane has been a great anchor. Dare on like the rifle work now is
Mm-hmm.
playing like out of his mind good. Like he's still dropping those crazy numbers that he was with the ops, and I think he's actually even gotten a like buff with the rifle versus tougher competition. Whereas when he was opping, he used to just kind of be like a noob farmer almost. The big issue with this roster is I can't take it seriously when MBG is their sub, and
Yeah, yeah.
like that's my thing is like I'm excited about these new prospects. Peeping in Dia, got to see both of these players play out on LAN,
Mm-hmm.
and they're really good. We got to see them in Chicago.
Right.
I think Peeping won it. Dia was playing with Boss at the time, kind of filling in that department, but it's just a shame that they are operating. I think Daryl will probably go back to opping, and MBG will just do whatever. But they're still going to go and bomb out for me
Mm-hmm.
because of that
That's
fact,
fair.
right? It's just not really serious. It's not like
No,
they got like, oh, it's a cool prospect for the substitute. They just got MBG.
I know that's a huge hit, and then also, I mean, Dare on the op, it's like you never know what you're gonna get with him. He could potentially take over a game for you, but he's not gonna do it on a consistent basis. And again, we spoke about how cutthroat the competition is going to be in terms of like getting two wins or two losses and you're out. So
Yeah.
Yeah, for that reason, we're gonna have to. I'd honestly agree with you. If they had their full roster, I'd honestly put them in the upset possible, or perhaps even the
Oh yeah.
qualified. I mean, there is a real world where Dare back on the rifle, Dia showed promise on land, and he's been showing promise on this new roster as well. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think a lot of people think that's like wild to say that, but if you look at like some of their like recent results here, they have kind of like dominated a couple of qualifiers here
mhm,
and have proven like this roster can do some serious damage. So
yeah,
I'm super excited to see if they can do anything. I doubt they will be able to be honest with you, but
yeah.
like they absolutely destroyed the League of Ace Masters, and they beat NRG and Wildcard to do it. I think NRG's gotten a lot better with time, and Wildcard as a team I think is pretty legit, so
Mhm.
it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so let's keep moving. Bestia is also just a very interesting team because I mean they've stuck together for so long now. We didn't get to see the full roster at Atlanta, and it felt like there was some promise there. They got I believe, an upset win. I mean they eliminated M80, so
Yeah,
granted M80 still had Def standing in, and we'll have them standing in for this tournament as well. But for Bestia, it's like I always feel very confused as to how I perceive this team because on paper domestically they seem to do decent, but every time you put them in a pressure situation, it feels like they always crumble, and I don't actually know how I would quantify whether or not Bestia can go over that little hump for them and actually qualify for the major.
yeah. I mean the real interesting thing about this team, and I think I was trying to identify that exact same problem. Why exactly this roster has had every RMR? They're always attending these events, but they haven't been able to level up that to like an actual qualification. Which, to be fair, it's hard to qualify when you're dealing with some of the best teams in the region. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the biggest difference here is that you do have a bit of a lack of op presence in the server. Noxy obviously doing the opping. He has this really experienced like ability to clutch impossible like rounds. He's such a clutch opper, even if his stats don't really have like the biggest impact. He's always going to be like the last man into a bomb site trying to save a round, and he gets away with these clutches when he's playing in these RMR qualifiers in South America. He can take down teams that require it here, and obviously you've got some really good riflers. But when you're talking about taking down the best in the region and playing better teams, I think that's where the biggest drop off is, and you don't see that impact out of Noxy, that little extra oomph that is required.
And it's so sad because you have some exciting players on this roster beyond that. You look at Luchov, you look at Myron, and they can really open up the game for you and start to take over, especially those really momentous T sides that I see a lot from them because of how aggressive some of these players can
Yeah.
get. But that'll always be what holds them back in my eyes as well. So I can see an upset being possible for them getting at least into that kind of like deep into the bracket, but at the end of the day, when you need them to go over the edge and beat maybe like an Imperial or an MIBR, I'm gonna be taking a Henny or a safe every day of the week,
Mhm.
unfortunately, and I think that's the huge thing that's gonna set them back. I mean, if this team had a Lucan on it and he was still opping, I honestly still I would be able to put them up a couple of spots, but they're gonna need to really work that out. And sadly, because you're in the Argentinian scene and you want to stay true to that region, it's going to be pretty brutal for them. But let's keep moving. Boss is obviously just a very like I don't really necessarily have a good pegging on them either because they don't have that much match prep considering their emergency stand-in situation with Pone alone. They've played maybe what 3, 4 maps max with him, and it's only been qualifiers. Sure, we don't have ECL as well, so they don't even have that type of space to rep with him. And for that reason, where do you really kind of rank this boss team now that they probably will have a Europe boot camp under their belts before they go to Monterey?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like that they're just, I obviously want to start off with a lot of bias to this roster here. I'm close friends with Cryptic, and so I kind of get some insider details here as
Yeah.
to how this roster's doing. And I feel like I'm with you. It's still like trying to gel with Pone alone, and kind of build in a little bit new system is definitely a tough task here. But the consistency in which they've have been able to bring here, and it's not like Pone is lacking that experience. Pone knows immediately out of the gates what it's like to play at an RMR. I think that's
Hmm.
going to be a huge benefit here to this squad. I think they did a great job, and and finding someone. And honestly, I think that there's a lot of motivation behind these players to really succeed, whether or not they're going to be in that realm of a roster that's going to qualify. I feel like that's a bit like that's pushing it, and that's kind of saying that. I mean, this roster can probably pull off like a Cinderella story. But I mean, again, they've got some really good pieces. I think they've made some exciting changes. Even just getting axed as part of the coaching um, has been really good because I think they lost a big bit of that when they did switch. Underrated part of this team, obviously, was when they switched out a wild card was losing Slight, but also losing their coach in Horvey as well. And
Hmm.
I felt like he gelled with these guys really well, and I thought very highly of him. But now having Axe as again an experienced coach who I think could offer up a lot of both like tactical and mental side to this team. Um, it's going to make them a threat here, but again, I would kind of box them in the part of upset possible
Yeah.
because they do have that experience.
No, I'm with you. I think it's very interesting to me to see that how this core has kind of just broken onto the scene and has maintained this kind of level for a while now. Where I kind of felt like that detonate roster back then was like, oh, it's just gonna be like a flash in the pan. You know, they're not gonna necessarily hang around, but they
Yeah,
kept doing it and they kept making it into the RMRs and at least the close qualifiers and just showing that they have what it takes. They've overcome a lot of just very insurmountable odds, I'd say,
yeah,
and just the fact that they're here is really exciting for me. And of course, you're exactly right that the Ponalone sub is still really exciting on paper, just because he can still perform on land, and we've seen it before. And he knows what it's like to play in those pressure situations. Let's not forget the one best of three that he was away from eliminating Imperial from the major. So I
right.
think that there's a lot that this team has on offer, and you know I can't necessarily say in good faith that they'll be able to qualify just because of the less amount of prep time that they have.
Mm.
But I could see a world where like next cycle it could work for them. Um, and then I guess the elephant in the room, it's like the complexity in the FURIA conversation. We'll start with complexity because do you think they are the legend caliber team here, or do you think that there's another team within the remaining that we have up here that would steal it away from them?
I wouldn't say complexity are in legend caliber form at all right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to disagree with that point. I think they would even say that they're not in that current form. It's obviously pretty tough Katowice for them. I
Hmm.
mean, they did play some really strong teams. When you lose to Spirit, you kind of shake that one off and say, hey, it is what it is. I think they lost
Yeah.
to Mouse as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I
Um,
believe so. That sounds
so
right.
definitely like tough losses, but before that, you're one of the teams that's lost NIP. It's actually Falcons to correct
Ah, right,
myself there.
Falcons. Yeah, yeah. Three maps
But before that, you lose to NIP, which was just like
at the groups,
actually
right?
infuriating for them. And every time I see these guys come up on like post game interviews, every time that they're talking, they're always discussing the frustration factor here. They're always saying like we have the good game plans, we have good like starts to games, and then one thing goes wrong and we can't course correct, and it's like we're seeing the identification of this problem here, and we're not seeing any solutions event after event. It's still frustration into collapse here, and it could be a little bit of that like Eliege effect, but also you can see Halzerk is like getting infuriated in some of these rounds, and kind of like just all out raging, and I feel like all
Hmm.
of that creates a really tough environment to succeed in.
No, I'm completely with you. I think the Halzerk effect is something that I think people were okay with letting go for the beginning of this iteration because they were getting results and it was all converting in the server. So it was like, hey, if that's not going to bother anybody, they're getting wins. Why even bring it up? But now that they are struggling a little bit, you can see the kind of effect that it brings upon them. And it's just like this dark cloud that comes over them, and they all just turn into shells of their former selves. And Elish starts taking less duels. Floppy kind of holes up on the sites a little bit more. Halzek might get even more aggressive and give away
Yeah,
opening deaths, and that's what really worries for me. Because I think that you're gonna have to really be on your A game here. Again, we can't stress it enough that the format is not as forgiving as it is in Europe, and for that reason, like I don't think that they would win the legend best of three, and I honestly think they might be in a situation where they have to be battling it out in these like final stages just because they have a stumble here or there and they fall behind. I will say they do perform pretty well domestically, but we've also seen like upsets happen. Like don't get me wrong, when we had what was the qualifier that you and I did together where they lost to Forsaken, and it was like a pretty
Sydney.
crushing
It was
Sydney
actually the
loss.
Sydney
Yeah,
qualifier.
yeah, and eventually they bounced back. They qualified and they made the final for it. So
Yeah.
fair enough. But there is always world for this team. This team bleeds, and I don't think it's anything is guaranteed for them at this event. And I think the same goes for some team like FURIA right now, who I'd argue are probably even in a bigger downturn.
Yeah, I think we recently had a conversation here, but I think this is just one of the worst forms I've seen this team in quite some time right now. It's just
Yeah.
been miserable event after miserable event, and I see their Eliza win, and I'm like, okay, that's nice, but it's really not that impressive. The like sequence of teams that they had to take down, it's nothing like super special. It
Yeah.
really is like a tier 2 land that they were able to hold on to, and then
Hmm.
immediately it was right back to losing. It's pretty depressing to watch this roster like fail to Mongols in every event and just get broken down by them.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like at this point it feels like it's only a matter of time, but like let's play this arm out or let's play this major before we do make those changes. But even still, I think that's a big if. If they make the major and they were able to secure that much, I'm still questioning whether or not this team is going to make those changes if they even care about winning. If you have Art and Fallen on the same team for this amount of time, like what's the point really? Like who are we kidding at this point right now? And it's even like watching these guys like try and figure out who's calling, and
Yeah.
it's just mental.
And I mean, the level of delusion on some of these players still is just incredible to me. I mean, I was telling this to you earlier where we were talking about. I think it was after they won one of the games at Elisa, and Quesaro was praising Fall and CT side calling
Oh
on
my
Mirage, which is like, come on, like I think we're all good enough at the game to understand how to play CT side Mirage and knowing how to have proper protocols on that map. And then it gets to a point that yeah, you're exactly right. You look at the Elisa results. They had a best of 3 win over Havu, which is like
god. Though I mean, gotta be one of the worst teams of last year. Like there's
yeah.
just no way.
And then what is it? A best of 3 win against Apex, which is like that at that point it's kind of fair, but that was also the point where Sense was still getting integrated into the roster, and they
Yeah,
still
he's
really
brand
didn't have
new and
identity.
and looked completely lost. Like
Yeah.
at that point, like he looked a lot better after this event. I'll give him some credit
Hmm.
here, but looked completely lost in that event in particular.
He was good at Atlanta, but yeah,
Yeah.
you're exactly right. But now you look at the results that they had in the showdown qualifier. They had a lot. They had 2 back-to-back losses against Metasport. Which look, I think Metasport is an exciting team in some ways. Nilo is a great young prospect, but they've still got a lot of work to do to figuring out how that team works. And Furia should never be losing. And this is
Where,
back-to-back mirages.
where are they going in the veto here? Like that, they have no identity. They have no map
Hmm.
that's like strong for them here. There's just no like easy pick for this roster in anywhere you go, and that makes them susceptible, like vulnerable to so many of these like teams that are coming through and preparing heavily for these
Hmm.
events, right? And if they don't like right the ship right now, uh, my kind of hot take, I said it, I think I'm being a little too harsh on them, but I think this roster could potentially fail. And it's high stakes. It's like easy to lose a best of 1 and a best of 3, and then
Hmm.
you're gone. But I I, I gotta say like this again is terrifying form from Furia leading into this event. The
So where do we,
European fights that they've put together here have
So
not been
where do
pretty.
we where do we want to put them? Do we want to put them in the upset possible and say that they're not
I'm
at
not
the
gonna go
caliber
that
of
far.
qualifying? Yeah,
I'm not gonna go
yeah,
that far. I think they're still in the boat. I think they're right there with complexity, and maybe even a little bit worse than complexity, where it's just like I've been constantly disappointed by this team,
yeah,
but they're gonna make it to the major surely.
yeah. Look. I mean, they
Fallen
still
always
have a
does
good
good in
enough
these
core,
RMRs, right?
right?
Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's his domain. Like for some reason he just gets a massive. I mean, not for some reason he knows how to deal with the pressure really, but it's like this is where he kind of thrives. And if he does fail here, obviously the the warning signs need to be ringing.
Right. No, exactly. I'm so curious to see what kind of Furia we get at this tournament. I don't think it's gonna be flawless, and I mean that legend spot is just gonna be very interesting because I mean we still have a couple of teams that I think are at that caliber. And I guess we can continue the conversation to Imperial because this team is also pretty interesting, and I think when we got to cast them at the Open qualifier, I was pretty surprised by the level of gameplay that we were gonna get out of them because look, I don't necessarily think that Vinny is the best IGL, and I honestly think he's a fantastic supportive element, and he has been for ages. But now all of a sudden he's been thrust into this calling role, and he's had to deal with brand new players to this level of the game in decency and no way, and has an expectation to get results. And so where do you kind of see this Imperial roster? Because I think this is another one where you don't really know what you're going to get out of them, and they have some pretty high upside when they do get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest thing, like you said, was Vinny here. How is he going to perform in the calling? Well, if you look at like the recent months here, ever since they picked up No Way and Decenty, they have just drastically improved. Their
Yeah.
trading has been just so much better than it used to be back. I mean, even in that like last RMR that they played out, where it was pretty miserable. You watched like
Mm-hmm.
actually Vinny like bumble around a little bit and unsure of like what he wanted to do. The trading has gotten a lot better. The conversions and the 5v4s have improved quite a bit as well. And you can see it's led to some regional dominance.
Mm-hmm.
They've qualified for, I believe,
Showdown, I think,
Pro
right?
League and Showdown.
Yeah.
And so like this roster is just constantly winning in their region, and they're winning versus teams that they're going to play in the RMR.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I know there's limited spots right now. And I talked about like I talked about like the hope of M80. I really hope that they can do some damage. I think Imperial is actually going to take a qualified spot. This is my kind of hot take. I think Zach comes through with a good enough game plan here. I think Zach and Vinny have been really working well off of each other, and
Mm-hmm.
watching this team constantly like beat down some of the competition that's going to be playing in this and like kind of ramping up for this event. I feel like they're going to be one of the teams that's actually going to lock this in.
And I think both of these newer players are just mechanically very gifted. Like they're just these raw forces that they can potentially take over a game. And then you also have that underlying factor of like how are these players going to perform on land because it's one of their first ones, if not their first
Yeah,
ones, I
that's
believe,
true.
right? So, but at the same time, you've got a vet in Zach who has been to these situations, has already led rosters to the RMR in 9Z. You look to players like Henny and Phelps who have seen just the top end of the game already. They're probably not going to be able to feel any pressure. Neither would potentially Vinny. So I feel like that's honestly not too far off. Like I can believe it. I'd honestly agree with you because you are going to get a level of consistency out of them, and it's the only question mark is how are Decenty and Noe going to perform on land. But yeah, I think the pieces are there, and I think these guys are not the type of players to let the foot off the gas. At least the coaching staff, in my eyes, are definitely not
Yeah.
the type of people to let the foot off the gas. So it'll be very interesting to see how Imperial performs. Legacy, on the other hand, is like one that just questions me. I just have so many questions about this roster because you look on paper and you're like, wow, Godsent Core, Coldzera, Chucky, the old Godsent coach as well. How is this team not dominating regionally anymore? Why are they still so far on the totem pole? Do you have any answers as to how you kind of perceive Legacy here?
It's tough to get a good read on them here. I'm with you. It's that roster has kind of like eluded me in terms of like a perfect answer because sometimes I watch this team and it feels like we're seeing the perfect game being called
Yeah.
out by the Nekas here and that has been a real good sign for this roster is that they have switched it up a little bit in that
Mm-hmm.
department. I think like Cole's leadership stunted their growth for quite some time, and
Definitely.
so now you're seeing this player who seems to be taking the reins a lot better. And again, that has led, when I casted them, I think it was in the online finals. They really impressed me. They were taking on some tough rosters and like pretty
Mm-hmm.
much dominated
They
them.
went deep, didn't they?
Yeah, they had a deep run there, and
Mm-hmm.
it is just the online finals. But if you're a South American team and you can make a deep run there, I mean, in my opinion, is like one of the tougher challenges. You have to play a lot of best of
Yeah.
threes. You got to get a lot of reps versus European teams, and that shows that you do have that floor, that capability. Uh, but will it be able to be shown? Will they keep that up here? I'm not so certain. And I mean, again, it does come down to like some of the individuals showing up. Like, I mean, obviously Dumao has a lot of anticipation around him and what he can do. I think bringing Barton back was a good idea in terms of like the supportive elements, but I'm
Hmm.
not so certain. And I feel like this roster is going to be one of those teams that is looking for upsets. I had high expectations, but I'm still kind of like disappointed with how they have been um, doing more recently.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think that it's interesting that at least to say that they have a battle tested roster that you have no worries about how they would perform on land. Like there's
Yeah.
really not going to be any jitters on these players. But yeah, the problem is just it does feel like they're still not cohesive enough to me, and I don't know what it is. I really don't because I really do think it just comes down to leadership. And Cold Zero's calling was okay at best. At least in
Hmm.
0-0 Nation, I really had troubles with him calling. And now that they have Barton back in the roster, I don't have any worries about their fifth, which is a good thing. But Nekes to me should be a player that should be focusing on his crosshair rather than trying to focus on calls. And that's my biggest issue is that if he's not on the forefront of the server, then all of a sudden now you have a real issue on your hands. And I think the elephant in the room is Coltera is now primary opping, which for those of you who have not been around the scene for that long, you might know the jumping double from his secondary AWP at Columbus, but he's not necessarily known to be a primary opper, and he's very willing to be more of a turret style, not really opening for getting you opening kills or anything of the like. And in fact, even in the LGSK days, there were situations where Taco would have the secondary AWP, let alone Cold Zero. So the fact that he's having to don it is really worrying to me because I'd like somebody that is battle tested to be out on the server trying to crack heads and trying to at least create space for some of your younger players. And so I'm with you. I think I'd put them in upset possible. I still do think that there's a potential with that roster because of just the names on paper that you never know, especially if they get off to a hot start in round one. But another team that I do feel like is just so brutal to be having to have this conversation with you is M80, right? And them having Def in their ranks instead of Manx their IGL feels pretty damning, especially after what we saw at Atlanta. And I mean, you and I were both like pretty down in the dumps after seeing the level and how dramatically it dropped with them losing Manx. Do you even think that there is a world that they get into that upset possible realm, or do you think that this team bombs out?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to like switch out a team, I would say M80 is like still more upset potential than like a team like Bestie or Boss for that
Yeah.
matter. Um, but I don't think there's much of a chance in qualifying. I think what Manx has provided, I mean, obviously he's shown that he's an incredible leader. With like prior rosters, he's been able to
Mm-hmm.
take his teams to like different lands, static. In the previous like iteration, he was able to make, I think, take it to Katowice, his like young squad that he
Yeah.
was able to qualify with. He beat Big multiple times in that qualifier, and I think that's really cool, and that's Katowice Challenger, by the way. I should I
Ah,
should
yes.
clarify.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I saw the confused face, and that
Yeah.
makes sense to be confused. But it was Challenger Katowice, not Katowice. I am Katowice. Um, but yeah,
And
I mean,
it was a tough route to get there, right? I mean,
yeah,
those European qualifiers to challengers are no joke.
yeah, incredibly tough, and they were able to again beat like a team like Big multiple times, and
Yeah.
that was with Manx calling. So when M80 picked him up, I felt like they really did a great job, and obviously, I wish him the best with the mental health there, and I hope that
Hmm.
he recovers and comes back stronger. But it is going to leave M80 with two of the most important events, just kind of down in the dumps, and starting off this event with a big asterisk, and that's not where you want to be when regionally you've been able to experience so much success. Like watching them in last season of ECL was just a
Yeah.
blast. It looked like they were gonna be that next like complexity, that next roster that's gonna
Hmm.
be like challenging some of these teams, causing big upsets, and again making them major, which is a big deal for this organization who's taking a risk on these players, and you want to see it pan out, obviously, but with this sort of situation with depth. I just don't know if that's going to be the case.
And you think about the kind of promise that they had before Manx had to step away. Like, think about the Chengdu qualification over Team Liquid. I mean, that was
Yeah,
a fantastic best of three to watch. And the fact that they were able to stay so clutch and poised. And sure, Liquid's a new team. They're still trying to work out the kinks. But you look at the names on
the
paper, and,
players.
and that should be a Liquid win every day of the week. And yet still, M80 hung around, showcased how they are that force to be reckoned with. And I am just so excited to see how this roster transpires when Manx comes back. But you look at the losses that they're suffering internationally. They lost against a Bestia roster that had two stand-ins. They lost to a Rebels roster that, sure, they had their big upset wins at Katowice, but I really just don't buy that team is any good. You and I have watched that team ad nauseum, and I know internationally Europeans love this team, but I really don't think that they have the pedigree that people say they do. And I honestly thought that M80 should have won that best of three had they had their full roster. But that really just goes to show you how low the floor is for this team. And I think another underrated problem that they're having is that Manx was also a pretty sufficient rifler, and he puts himself in
Yes.
a pack positions that are like really important. So when I think about positions, I think about Def on Anubis. He's now having to play camera slash mid. You can't play that position if you do not have any understanding of how your rotations are being played out, how a potential default would play towards you, and you can see that at Atlanta he was just getting rocked because he just had
Yeah.
no idea what was coming before him, and of course. If individually he can't keep up, then those positions can get bullied again and again and again. And it was time in and time out, no matter what maps they were playing. So either they have to have some radical role changes, which I think is possible. I mean, you
They
and I
can
have
do
also
that though,
spoken.
yeah.
Right.
You're talking about like Rec on this team, Malbs on this team. I feel like, and Swisher's
Swisher
willingness
as well,
to
yeah.
switch things up as well. Like all their riflers can easily adapt. I feel like this is one of the like biggest benefits that this team has. But I need to see it happen. Like you said, some of the roles here that makes is playing. I think or sorry, Depth is playing right now for this
Mhm.
team are a little bit too impactful for his like output.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'll put them in upset possible at the very tail end, but I don't be surprised if they go out 0-2. Like, genuinely don't. Because it is a very exciting roster, but it is what it is. MIBR, though, is also just like hard to figure out because they had this huge upswing at the beginning or so the end of 2023 where they were going deep in some EU tournaments. I think it was that Perry Please, I believe, where they were able
Very
to get some
pleased.
scalps.
They did very pleased or was it Bet Boom?
It might have been both, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Let me
But
see.
yeah, I don't. They either way they were doing like really good work here in like international competition, and I think that was largely off the back that they had been boot camping in Europe for
Yeah, it was both
pretty
of them.
much the entire second half of 2023. When I talked to Safe before one of the online finals, I did an interview with him, and he said like I've never worked this hard in my life. Underneath this MIBR banner, getting the most like preps, boot camping, being away from home for so long, and then they before this RMR are doing it again. They're in that same boat where they've done some of their best work and they're going right back to it prior to the RMR. And any team that's doing that is, I think, going to get a big buff.
Yeah, so it was top four at Bet Boom Dacha, Yon Chipping, and Perry Please, which was like a huge slew of events for them,
Yeah,
and that does prove a lot of
and
good
their pro
form.
league run prior to that, right? They did decent work in pro league, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah. But the problem is that results wise in the new season has been kind of lackluster. You look at the EPL qualifier, they failed to, I believe, even reach the final few stages. They got eliminated pretty early in the round of
Yeah,
16. They couldn't qualify for the showdown as well with another loss to Imperial there. Pretty close best of three, but all in all, still shown up by Vinny. And so to me, it's like, what form are we going to get MIBR in? I still feel as though you get another gear out of Insani on land that you just don't get, and a certain level out of MIBR in general on land that you just don't get from them online. and I do feel like they kind of phone it in here and there when it is some of these qualifying situations. So I still feel confident in their qualification,
Mhm.
just off the back of players like Insani, and I think Safe domestically just
Safe,
farms
dude.
things.
Safe is the best America's RMR opper. That's
Yeah,
gonna show up there. That's kind of my hot take. Is
I'd agree with you. Yeah,
that his opping like regionally just does so much better. Especially on land. If you remember, it might have been last RMR or maybe 2
Furia with
Rio.
Furia. Yeah.
Yeah, with FURIA, he was one of the top rated players at that last
Hmm.
RMR, and so obviously having to do it with a bit of a different roster here, but versus the same competition and competition that he is historically just broken down. So I fully expect that to replicate. Alongside, dude, Drop has been playing so much better underneath this roster here. He's actually given resources like
Yeah.
I've never once seen Drop get like flashed into a B bomb site, like full execution utility on Ancient for Drop to just go in solo and kill 2 people, and he does it consistently in some of these like online qualifiers. And so like Drop, his performance has just been constantly on an upward trend, and it really just goes to show how much I feel like Fury have just
Yeah.
mishandled some of these situations at their roster. It just feels like constant because Drop I never thought was like a big glaring issue. He'd make a couple mistakes. He's very aggressive,
Hmm.
but with that, if you were able to rein it in and utilize it properly, it looks really good on MIBR, and it actually just straight up wins them rounds.
And that'll always beg the question of how these players on Fury are characterizing their newer additions, right? So they have this really high opinion of Fallen, but they do give Drop the short end of the stick in pretty much every scenario, and he still was managing to output quite a bit. I felt like at Rio he wasn't the issue, and was a big reason why they were actually stuck into to staying deep in a lot of those tournaments. But of course, I think that he has been improving a lot on MIBR, and I'm very excited to see this team play a little bit more because I think they can be a force at this tournament. Let's talk about Nouns. I think that Nouns is also just uh, an America's team that I feel like got really have been getting close at these opportunities, but just haven't been able to convert. And I think this is another one of those situations where I feel like I can't write them through, even though they have this addition of a Dren behind them. I still don't really believe in a player like Carson and his calls, and I still feel like there is a bit of an opping problem on this team, and I don't know how you're necessarily going to solve this issue on Nouns, where I feel like they're having just identity problems in general.
Yeah, I'm with you. And to add to that here, I'm hoping that like this boot camp that they're doing, they're over there in Europe again, trying to get reps. But the last time they did this here, that they came back, and I think their protocols got a whole lot more promising. I think they learned a lot from those sort of experiences.
Hmm.
But again, it didn't instantly translate into like success. They came back and after they had boot camped for I think a month or two in Europe and Poland, they came back and pretty much bombed out of that ECL season. So it was
Hmm.
just a bit disappointing to see because again, like they placed a lot of trust in these now players, and you see the potential. Like again, Marky's been really
Hmm.
effective here. You've got some exciting pieces, but I'm with you. I've been just slightly disappointed with the amount of resources this team has gotten and some of the rosters that they've been kind of struggling with on a consistent basis.
I like Markey a lot, and I mean he's been outputting frags for years now on this Nouns
Yeah.
roster, and is so exciting to see such a consistent form from him throughout, and it is a big reason why they are getting into these positions in the first place. Uh, I do like the addition of George on this roster, but it still doesn't feel like he's completely integrated onto this roster, and I feel like it's been a far cry from seeing the George that really excited me when he initially broke onto the scene. And
Yeah.
of course, Junior will always be that player that you just feel like what are we doing here? Like what is the ceiling for this player, and how many more chances are we going to give him until we say enough is enough? We just got to go to a different direction.
Yeah. I mean, his opping obviously it can be a big liability. It can be a big problem, especially when I think like higher pressure games come around and better teams is what he's playing here at this RMR. There's no question.
Hmm.
I think that they can put a scare on some rosters, so
For
I
sure.
still think they're like in that upset potential. I know this is like the most popular category now, but
Yeah.
they have so much potential. When Carson plays well here, I mean, obviously still taking the role of calling, but when he like finds his groove and is able to do some of that like injury work there, this roster really can thrive. And with that, I feel like we got to give them some credit, and I hope to see these guys kind of level up their game off the back of this like boot camp. I want to see them show what they're made of and show that improvement. And they do
Yeah.
pretty well at RMRs historically as well. They're no
Right.
stranger to these positions.
An EU boot camp with a Dren is like just an exciting prospect in and of itself. And yeah, as you said, let's not forget the Paris RMR where they nearly eliminated Liquid out of the major contention.
Yeah,
They were a map up on them as well. So yeah, none of these teams can really slouch when they play against Nouns, and I think there's a real world where they can cause some scares for sure. Now, another team that I don't think is necessarily going to be causing as many upsets, but it's still an interesting roster nonetheless, is Audic, who have Woody, Turtle, and as their most newest additions. And honestly, it's not the worst looking roster on paper because of those additions, but at the same time, like domestically, they have really struggled.
yeah. I mean, this roster, I'm gonna be a little bit harsh here and just like set the tone early.
Yeah,
That I think they're gonna bomb out.
yeah,
I
I don't
don't
think you're
think that
far
they
off.
I don't think that they are super like they're deserving to be here. Obviously, they won the matches to get to this point, but
Yeah.
they just don't have like the players or this roster makes up with like the lack of firepower and like just the lack of name value is almost certainly Woody and what this guy has provided so many teams in the past. The biggest mistake any Brazilian roster over the last like 2 years has made is cutting this guy because he doesn't frag that much. He struggles here for sure in like regional competition, but every team that he has left has gotten drastically worse.
Hmm.
And so you can tell that this guy's calling is just uh, so impactful here, and it actually gives teams directions. And in the South American scene, you know, the reason why they were able to qualify, I'll straight up say it is because this guy, he gives his squad a direction. He gives them a game plan that can win them maps and series and best of ones. And so while I think that they'll be able to do that maybe on this at this RMR. I just don't think that they're going to be able to challenge some of these better rosters.
I'm always gonna think about the kind of hot potato IGL thing that MIBR had to do once
MIBR,
Woody left. I mean, you had Joda IGLing, you had, I believe, I mean, exit calls now, but I
yeah.
mean, they had so many different players that
Cello was
were
calling, I think, for a
right.
little while.
Cello, yeah, and really, really think long and hard about how Cello was calling on this roster at some point, and yeah, they had huge issues, and I think Fluxo qualifying to the major outright with Woody and Zeus was everything, and I think it showed that combo should have been feared and respected, and instead they decided to go the way of PKL, and do you
Look
see
at them
PK?
now.
Yeah, do you see Fluxo on this list? You don't, and so that all of a sudden just kind of goes to show the kind of impact that Woody has. The elephant in the room, though, is that I think his opping is pretty lackluster, and you do get a huge setback because of it. And I can see the reasoning as to why a team might cut him for the individual aspect of it, because he has such an expensive gun and that he has to kind of output frags that way. But then you have to look beyond that and say who's going to do the heavy lifting in terms of the firepower on this roster. Turtle's been getting you numbers, but I don't think he's necessarily that kind of superstar. And Nighty can have some moments, but again, I do think it's pretty inconsistent. And I'm with you. I think that this roster is going to be happy that at least the core of this team is going to be very happy to attend this event and get to play against some of the best in the country and be at Monterey. But other than that, I think this team is going to bomb out. And another team that I think is hot under pressure is Pain, because sure they've got Big Azera and sure they have NQZ, but this team is a far cry from the Pain of old. So how do you kind of characterize Pain as of right now, and what do you think about players like Nissim, players like Lux?
Yeah, I mean, I like that you bring up those two individuals here because it really is just a tale of like kind of maybe second chances for both of these players. Less so for Nissim because I think he was kind of on the rise as he headed into this team, but for Lux, I mean, again, one of those players that was cut from Fluxo, and I was just kind of scratching my head.
Yeah.
You know, what sort of direction. I think that was actually before they qualified, and the reason he was initially cut from that team was because they wanted to get Opper, and Woody went to rifling, and so he
Mhm.
was like the kind of like exit player that left the team. But his rifling has stayed consistent, whereas Nissim, compared to like his days in Sharks when Sharks was like a threatening roster back in the day, this might have been like you know last year at the end of like 2 years, 2022 even.
About so,
Um,
yeah.
Nissim has just kind of dropped off a big cliff heading into this Pain roster.
Hmm.
And that to me is like super concerning here because I saw so much potential when this guy was like challenging complexity and damaging them and like making it through some of the like showdown qualifiers and you know doing damage with this Sharks roster, but it seems like he hasn't been able to find the same like level on this Pain squad. And again, you know, like you said, you got to give Big U a lot of credit for what he has been able to do. I think again, Pain are going to
Hmm.
be happy that they qualified to this RMR, but when you look at the results regionally here, Pain have done nothing but kind of disappoint. And for that, like again, I feel like that lack of consistency, the lack of like Nissim's presence as a rifler in the server, it's gonna put them in the bombed out category for me again.
Yeah, and you put so much risk on NQZ's shoulders, and we've seen what he's like at the bigger tournaments. He's kind of struggled, to be honest with you, and hasn't really delivered that kind of star power that teams like Zero Nation really wanted to buy into. And it's so unfortunate to even be putting Pain in this category because you have I'd argue the best IGL in Brazil on this team, and he's been given pieces that cannot win you games consistently.
Hmm.
And who knows how long you're gonna get that kind of calling style from Bigu. And if he does inevitably get a call to like a Furia or like maybe an Imperial or a Legacy later down the road, it's gonna be so sad if he just doesn't rise up to the task, and then people start pointing fingers saying that he was never good in the first place. And I just hope that we haven't missed the window of a good Bigu Zera performance because I still think he has it.
Yeah, I don't think we have. I hope that he gets a chance here with the new teams. I imagine that Pain are holding on to him pretty tight right now, to be
That's
honest,
what I'd
because of
assume. Yeah.
that massive shift in Pain's roster. But he was like him and Skulls were like the last players standing, and obviously Skulls ended up going as well. So it makes me think Pain are like honestly doing a smart move and saying, "Hey, we are gonna keep a good IGL. We're gonna trust that this guy can do it." And well, again, they made it to another RMR here, and credit to them for being able to do it. Just again, like you said, what can they do in these big games? I mean,
Hmm.
NQZ, like you said, I mean, sometimes in like the actual big games does crumble, but he was one of the first Brazilian players to qualify to
That is
the
true.
Rio RMR, so
Yeah.
maybe he can level up. He's been playing pretty well, so.
Red Canids is a team that we've spoken about a bit, and on paper, it's a pretty exciting one. Like you look at Nithon, who is a former Pain AWP player, and he was fantastic there. You look at Venom Zera, who's been on this organization's books for so long and has done a lot of great work for them. You look at Hard Zhao, who's been doing a lot of heavy lifting in the anchoring department, starting to get a little bit freer as well. And yet still, there's this huge issue in terms of the level of consistency that you're going to get out of them. And what do you really think about Red Cannons? Is there an expectation that they can qualify? Can they get an upset? Do they bomb out? Because to me, I feel like this team is an IGL change away from being a top 2-3 team in Brazil. But without that, I feel like they're a bit worse for wear.
Yeah, I 100% agree right there, right? Their lack of leadership is so evident when you watch actually some of the best aggressive riflers that you have in the South American scene and David
Mm-hmm.
and Venom
Yeah,
Zera. Like
yeah.
these two guys are just absolutely incredible. And then you watch them still struggle to pick up like 4v5 conversions that
Mm-hmm.
they have so often that they've been built in. Nithon used to be one of those like stud oppers as well. You could find so many different opening picks and for me like you said the leadership is just not really flowing here. Nithon's calling is taking a hit on his opping big time. He's
Mm-hmm.
no longer finding these opening picks. He's no longer like the op that he used to be when they were playing this trio that had been working together for so long in Nithon, Venom Zera, and Destiny. And for my brain, like it just makes so much more sense that Destiny would be the one to call on this squad as
Yeah.
opposed to Nithon, right? If that's like his personality or his style, like the role that he plays and kind of the trajectory that he's taken when you get a player like Hardzao and David, these two excellent pieces, experienced pieces, right? Um, you kind of have to pick up that mantle as opposed to Nithon, in my opinion. And with Nithon, like I think losing so much confidence that in some of these series he's not even buying an op, it's like
Yeah.
it's actually just pretty devastating to watch. Again, a roster with so much potential struggle in what I feel like is like a easy, like quick roster change or different target selection. Makes me think like Nithon's holding on to that role pretty tight.
And you talked about it. We were doing a series comparison between Cold Zera primary opping and like Nithon primary opping, and Cold Zera's having like more than double the kills. And we already spoke about how Cold Zera ops. Like there's a pretty low bar for Nithon to clear, and he's just not been able to do it. And it's really upsetting because we know what he's capable of. We know what he's actually shown in years past. And sure, it's a new game and the ops still trying to be figured out, but this floor is so incredibly low that you've got to find either a replacement for him, where you find an opping IGL somewhere like a Woody, or you make Destiny call and just try to work with this 5-man unit, because this 5-man unit can still, I think, do some damage. And even uh, in their current state, I still think they can do a little bit of damage.
Yeah,
I'd honestly argue that I can put them in that upset possible
yeah,
category. Probably a little bit. If I had to actually rank those teams, I'd probably put them at the lesser end. But I think that players like Venom Zera are super exciting to watch. Davideus has not stopped a beat after his time on 9Z. I actually thought that move alone was pretty questionable from the org, but
yeah.
Red Canids are taking that by both hands, and I'm glad that he's succeeding there. So don't get me wrong, I think this team still has some upset potential. But let's talk about the team that I think everybody wants to hear our opinions about, and it's Team Liquid. Do you think that they are that legend team? And if you could definitely say no, and we can argue about the rest of the other four teams, but I have a sneaking suspicion I know where your head's at here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a little bit too much faith in this organization kind of preparing themselves here. It obviously was a bit of a surprising loss, them failing to qualify for IEM Chengdu. And again, watching them kind of get broken down by M80 was exciting. It was cool to see.
Yeah,
But this roster has had a lot of time to prepare themselves here for this this RMR, and I think that's going to lead again with the name value here. You think about players like Naf and Twist and the NA side of thing here, and the potential that these guys can bring to the table. Cadian's calling. You give him a month to kind of nail things down, and he's going to be able to come up with a good game plan. It just feels like they're working with too many pieces for it to fail. And again, when you talk about all of the other like levels of this competition here, I don't have faith that anyone is going to be preparing as hard as Liquid right now.
completely agree. And I mean, if I have to play devil's advocate, I'd talk about a couple of issues that they have had in the tournaments that they've played. I think Skulls took a little bit of time to get acclimated into this environment, and I think towards the tail end of the officials that they played, he was showing a little bit more capability. And then I think the other big elephant in the room is Cadian's opping. Has not necessarily been too great, and I'll cut him some slack and say that he's got to build an entirely new system now, one that has to adapt phases ecosystems, X Team Liquid's ecosystems, and his lifeblood from Heroic as well. And trying to actually combine all three of those ideas is really difficult to do. I'm not gonna just give him a pass and say like, oh, you know, it's very easy to do. It's gonna be quite the tribulation, and I think he's already on the road to at least looking like a squad. But I think that they're still a little bit ways away. But that being said, even if you get like a 60%, 70% Liquid at this tournament, you can't go wrong with the kind of stability that they have off of players like Naf and players like a Yekindar, who I have an expectation will start popping heads. Um, I am looking at Twists though, because he is putting himself into star positions pretty much on every map at this point, and I'm very curious to see whether he kind of rises to the occasion or not, because in some situations he really flourished. I really liked how he played on Ancient. He has that little late mid lurk style that Liege likes to play. On Anubis, they're very keen on letting him go second, third into bomb site hits, and they are very willing to give him a lot of space. But there are certain situations where I also see him flounder, and when he flounders, they don't have that BC game in them yet to kind of activate, and that's what I'm worried about. Is how are they going to play on their BC game at this kind of a tournament against somebody like a Complexity or an MIBR. And that's the question that I pose to you, is that do you think that their BC level is good enough to kind of stack up against them and take that legend spot?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest like roster consistency right now that could maybe challenge them. I'm putting Imperial up there as like one of the better
Sure.
rosters that I think I've seen enough consistency that they can actually punish some of those like struggled games if we see that out of Liquid. But again, you know, if Liquid comes in and plays confidently, I don't think that they're gonna have much trouble breaking past a couple of these rosters. Again, like the biggest reason I'm saying this is because not that I have a lot of faith in Liquid. It's just more so that I've seen just way too much struggle out of these teams that I think are a
Yeah.
walk in to qualify here. We haven't seen a great form out of Furia in months. I would even argue that Espo it was good form, it was a good win for them, but
Hmm.
still again the asterisk around that competition of it just being lesser teams and lesser caliber. Then you look at of course complexity, and you know if they get one frustrating round, they're a couple like rages away from breaking down and you know Liquid's obviously going to be able to capitalize on some of that. I feel like, and I just can't imagine a world where a lot of these teams that I think are going to be in that like 3-0 like kind of Legends qualifications position and say, hey, like we're going to challenge this Liquid roster. We're going to come into
Hmm.
this match confidently.
Yeah, and I think the team culture them for them as well makes me feel like they're kind of ironclad in terms of the pressure that they feel and how their mental is going to be going into the game. Whereas you look at a team like a Complexity or maybe even a Furia, where you can see them mentally collapse in a game. I don't necessarily feel like this team is ever going to be down and out, and that makes me really excited to see what kind of Liquid that we get at this tournament. There's a lot of high hopes and there's a lot of pressure on them, I think, as well, because
Yeah.
with them not being at Chengdu, and you look at the rest of their calendar, it's going to be really hard pressed. In all honesty, they have to go pretty deep at this major entirely to kind of warrant getting some points in in the ESL World Rankings and the blast point system as well. So
And
um,
just, I mean, for their team alone, like this roster has had so much hype over the last couple of months. So many people
yeah.
believe in this team here, and if they do not show up, if they fail, I'm not even gonna like venture to say if they fail at this RMR, but if they venture to fail at the major here,
Hmm.
it's gonna be a little bit disappointing here. And you know, again, the question marks around how much time do we want to give these guys is gonna flare up, and that's never where you want to be as a new lineup that has a lot of excitement.
No, exactly. Well, I don't have as much of an exciting discussion for this last team, but we might as well talk about them as well. I still think that this is actually a pretty fun roster. At least you and I have both been pretty excited about their development, and that is Wildcard. And I think the Forsaken core has always excited me, and they've still proven time and time again that they still have what it takes to compete against the upper levels of North American competition. Stanislaw has been calling pretty unique style for North America, I'd say,
Mm.
in the sense that he has these slow crawling defaults, and it's really kind of constricted a lot of these players. And the players on Wildcard really buy into the system, and I really do like that they are willing to buy into the system. Players like Infinite have that pop up potential. Smarter players like JBA have done a whole lot of work for this team. That being said, you have new players in terms of Slights Edition and Slights Edition, as well as who am I forgetting? Why am I just forgetting? Sonic, right?
Sonic, yeah.
And I think it begs the question: like, do you think these cuts for Sixy and Wiz make the most sense? Do you think that this team has what it takes to potentially sneak up and claim a spot, or do you think that there's just it's not good enough?
So I obviously again like both you and I really have high expectations for this like wild card roster. I agree with you on the like Stan's calling has actually been one of like the biggest pleasures out of 2023 is watching him
Yeah.
be able to like kind of bring a new style to NA. It's maybe
Hmm.
not the most fun to cast. It's very VP-esque.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like actually brutal to watch when you watch them like run out of time, which was a
Hmm.
problem in the beginning stages of this like transition away from 60 and Wiz. But I think recently, they've really come into form, and like you said, there's a lot more of this like belief that this can work here, and
Yeah.
as they gain those results, as they gather that steam here, I feel like more and more faith is going to be built into the system, and you're going to see Stanislaw become like the North American James of just defining like
Yeah.
this brutal style to play against. And when you talk about like some of the teams that they're going to be going up against, I think that's like the perfect opportunity for this roster, for this player here, this IGL to kind of capitalize against some of these teams that again have problems with frustration, that have problems with you know, CT side aggression. M80 love to get aggressive, Complexity love to get aggressive. All of these South American teams are going to go on
Hmm.
these aggressive maneuvers, and I think Stan has defined a style that is going to punish this and give them a lot of potential here. And so Wildcard for me are going to come into this as one of the more underrated rosters entirely. I still wish they had 60. I still wish that was the case there.
Yeah.
I don't really fully believe in Sonic's like comeback into the scene here. But still, I feel like this roster can seriously break some teams down.
No, and that's kind of what they're banking on. They're banking on the core of this roster and the identity of this roster to carry them through because yeah, Sonic's been struggling and I honestly think Slight's been struggling a whole bunch as well. Like I don't really feel like I'm getting 100% out of him and Wiz was is what it was and he had a couple stints for himself as well, but I think that opping problem really kind of
It's I mean
rubs me the wrong way.
it's two polar opposite oppers when you talk about like Slight loves to call his shots. He really does
Right.
have that ability, and even I think Stan gives him that freedom to do so, or at least in some like events I've seen him get that freedom. For better or for
Mm.
worse, like Slight I think can still call his shots, and that's good to see. I like to see that sort of format of Slight. Whereas Wiz, I think, is such a systems opper and such like a passive opper. He is going to be that last man into a bomb site. He's going to be closing you out at like one or two 1v2 clutches in some of these
Mm.
like regional matches where he really thrives. And I mean, again, I feel like if you ever wanted to get a better ceiling, maybe Wiz needed to go. I don't think he was always going to be up to the
Yeah.
task of tier one competition, at least from what we've seen and what was evident in his time so far. But I mean, looking at Slight, like you said, the struggles are certainly there. I still like that he has that freedom to make those plays, and I think that that can actually be utilized by Stan as like an extra element to this team that gives some extra flair.
Yeah, and that'll do it. I'm very excited to actually watch the Americas RMR because I mean, look at this tier list that we've created. A lot of upset potential is there, but we've picked Complexity, Furia, Imperial, MIBR, and Liquid to go through, and I think a lot of people are under the same sentiment. I know Jeff at Dust 2 has been running so many different scenarios, and this is pretty much one of the ones that he usually settles on. And I think that
Hmm.
it'll be very curious to see what actually shakes up because you never know with these RMRs. I mean, even right now in the EU RMRs, Astralis is 1-2, one map, one series away from elimination at the time of this recording. So anything can happen, and I'm just very excited to actually get the show on the road. Well, thanks for joining me, Cole.
Thanks for having me.
Also always super exciting to talk Counter Strike with you, and for those of you watching, if you guys liked it, definitely hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.